Welcome to part 2 of our interview with Dr. Mauricio Castillo, Emeritus Editor of the AJNR, discussing insights and tips on how to perform a good peer review. In the first part of this interview, we reviewed a general overview of what makes a good or bad review. Now let's look through a theoretical article, piece by piece, to learn how you should approach it. Dr. Castillo, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.
First question. Once you've had an initial look at an article, what is your next step?
Well, Kevin, I think that in the first part of the interview, we spoke about having an initial look at the article, and I mentioned that I read the abstract and I read the introduction, and then I will go ahead and read the entire article, and I myself use markers of different colors, yellow or red color, for different questions that I have. And like I said before, I go writing my questions or my points of view in the back of the article. So I do that. I give the article a read from the beginning to the end and make notes, and those notes will serve me when I have to go back to each individual part of the article and look at each one in detail.
Great. So let's go through that in detail then. So let's start from the beginning and just work our way through the article and get some advice from you about what you look for in each of those sections. Starting first with the abstract. What do you look for in the abstract?
Well, according to the journal guidelines, an abstract should have different subsections. I make sure that those subsections are present. I make sure that there's a well-defined objective, and it's preferable if that objective is expressed in the form of a hypothesis. I look at the materials and methods just to see if I can spot any big error in statistical methods used or the collection of the data. And then I make sure that in the conclusions, the objective is directly and concisely addressed by that conclusion, which should generally not be more than 1 or 2 sentences in length.
Great. Then the introduction. What do you look for in the introduction?
Well, I think that the introduction ought to give you a good background with references. There ought to be a good number of references without being overwhelming. There should be no illustrations quoted in the introduction. That's for later in the article. It should be no more than 1.5 to 2 pages long. And at the end of the introduction, you should find the objective as it was expressed in the abstract rewritten in the exact same way in order to give your readers an idea again as to what the rest of the paper will be on.
Great, very clear discussion of that, and this is something that I think will be very valuable to listen back through the next time I'm thinking about working through an article, just a general guide to each of these sections. Let's keep moving. So what do you look for in the materials and methods section?
Well, Kevin, as its name implies, there are 2 parts with this section. The materials. You're going to look at the materials themselves, whether there were patients or cases or images or something else. You're going to see how these were collected. Many times, a group or cohort of patients was incorrectly selected, and that to me signifies that the article will have to be rewritten, and thus it has to be rejected. You want to look at the equipment that was used. You want to look at the techniques. Obviously, if the incorrect imaging technique, for example, for MR studies was used, that is also an article that probably needs to be rejected because it has to be started from scratch. And then you have to look at the statistical methods. And I think that most of us have some idea of statistical methods, but as you have found yourself as a reviewer, many of the current statistical methods go beyond our understanding. So there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that you should point it out in the review, and the editor-in-chief will probably have somebody in the editorial board who is a dedicated statistician or somebody else who has good knowledge and will send that article to that person so that that person can assure that the statistics that were employed were actually the correct ones.
Excellent. Next, what do you look for in the results section?
So in the results, what we want to see is we want to see the same topics that were outlined or discussed in the materials and methods addressed in the same order. For example, if you collected a cohort of patients and then in the results you want to see something like their age, their gender, why were they discarded from the study and not included in the study, and then each statistical method or analysis that was applied to each part of the materials, you want to see it discussed in the same order so you can go back and see in the materials and methods which statistics were going to be used, and then in the results, how were they used and what were the results. And just by looking at the results, probably you will have an idea of whether the statistical methods that were used were correct or not. So those are the most important things. And remember to go look at that results section and go look and compare that results section with the results section that was in the abstract too, to make sure that the results match in the two different sections of the article.
Excellent. Let's keep moving. What do you look for in the discussion section?
Well, the discussion has to be long, but not too long. I think that a problem that we find in the majority of discussions is that there is considerable amount of irrelevant discussion. To me, the discussion has to be with how your article supports or is different than other articles that are on a similar topic that have been published before. Just to go over a very long discussion on a topic, a mitochondrial disorder or a strange syndrome, that really does not help anybody. You have to, you know, tell the reader how what you did, how is it different than what was done before, and how it is contributing to science. Obviously, you must have a caveat section. No matter what we do, there's always problems in areas that we as the authors recognize that could be improved. And then at the end of the discussion, you got to have a very short conclusion section in which you restate your findings and how do they support or not support your initial objective or hypothesis. There are things that are included in all discussions. For example, things that we like to say, our number of patients was too small, and thus we suggest that a larger series of patients be done. That to me is a completely useless statement and shouldn't be in the discussion. There's always ways that we can improve what's been published before, and that is probably why we're doing a new article on that same topic.
Excellent advice. Um, Next, what do you look for in terms of with regard to the tables and figures in an article?
The problem with tables, Kevin, is that they're expensive, they occupy a lot of time, and many times they have to be input manually. So I would guess that most editors hate tables. So the first thing that you have to look at a table is is the table absolutely necessary, or everything that's found in the table was already addressed in the results section. The same thing goes for graphs. If there are very long tables, those tables actually have to go with the article itself, or they can be published separately in a different part of the website to keep the article short. And then you need to look at the figures and make sure that the figures are of good quality, that they have the correct callouts when it comes to arrows and other labels that are used in the figure. There's not too many of them. They occupy a lot of space. And generally, people like to put normal figures, like to put an abnormal figure, and then a one that's a normal brain to explain to you what the difference is between the abnormal and the normal. Well, we all know what a normal brain looks like. So I think that normal figures or figures of normal patients really don't have any place in an article. So those are the things that I look for. And believe me, when you're an editor and you go back and look at the published journal at the end of the month, the majority of problems that you're going to find are with the figures that have been switched from side to side or upside down, or there's no callouts in the figure legend for something that's found in the figures. So that I think it's a big important of reviewing to not forgetting to look very, very carefully at the figures.
That's great to hear the editor's perspective on this. This is really enlightening just to hear your take on this. One final question for you. So after reviewing all of the sections of the manuscript and the tables and figures, how do you make a final decision that is most informative for the editor? And also, what reasons would you offer as to why an article should be accepted or rejected?
Well, Kevin, as we said in the first part of this interview, I think that most articles will need revisions and sometimes extensive revisions. I think that few changes in an article can be assessed directly by the editor in chief to save time, or they can go back to the reviewer. But major revisions need to be evaluated by the reviewers who initially looked at the article, and the article may have to undergo peer review again. It's something that perhaps as authors it offends us a little bit, but I think that all of this is done to assure that once the article is published, you as an author will have no problems with it. I think that you need to avoid offensive comments in the review. I think that you need to remember that your review ought to be well written from a grammar and a spelling standpoint. There's nothing worse than seeing, somebody criticize your article in a review that's been poorly written. Um, People tend to point out problems with the English language. Like I said before, unless the English language is very poorly employed, I wouldn't comment on it. Like I said before too, most articles are rejected because of a problem with the collection of the data or with the analysis of the data, things that you really cannot go back and redo in an easy way. It would mean the start of the article as a whole again. Remember too that your review will be evaluated by the editor in chief, so it has to be of good quality. So you will be invited to review again, and perhaps you will get an honor at the end of the year by being chosen as one of the best reviewers of that year for the journal.
What valuable insight. Thanks so much for sharing. This concludes our interview. Dr. Castillo has given us a treasure trove of information today, which I think will be valuable for both authors and reviewers alike. I plan to listen to this the next time I write or review an article and would encourage you to do the same. Dr. Castillo, thanks so much for joining us and for giving us your time.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Alex, and thanks to Dr. Wintermark for including me in this initiative.